Hello, everybody. Welcome today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm here accompanied with Iris van der Weken, who is the Executive Director of the Responsible Jewellery Council, and we're going to be talking about sustainability in the post-COVID era. To kick off, I would like to show you a video, but before I do that, I just want to let you know that Iris joined the Responsible Jewellery Council in April last year. She's very, very passionate about gender empowerment, and she has had a very interesting time supporting the Special Olympics as a volunteer over many years. She's very passionate about all the issues involved with the Responsible Jewellery Council, which we'll get into after this video. Let's just show you a 2.5-minute video from the RJC, which we'll show you just right now.
Jewelry has always played a special role in people's lives, carrying personal and emotional significance. The story behind the jewelry is often as precious to us as the jewelry itself. People want to know where their jewelry comes from, how it is made, and who has had a hand in crafting it. We were founded in 2005 by 14 members with a pioneering vision that all jewellery should be produced responsibly, helping people prosper and preserving the planet. Now, more than 1,200 members share our vision of a responsible worldwide supply chain that promotes trust in the global jewellery and watch industry. This vision has never been more relevant than today. Our members are companies from all over the world, big and small, working together to make sure that every link of jewellery and watch supply chains is responsible, continuously improving their management systems and adhering to the RJC Code of Practices. We have set the global standard for the responsible jewellery and watch industry, the only one to cover the full chain from mine to consumer. Our further alignment with the OECD due diligence and the UN guiding principles is a step forward in the long-term sustainability journey ahead. More companies becoming members means creating an even greater positive impact on the jewellery and watch industry. We are transforming the way we work with members to serve them better, and we will make our voice heard in the conversations that matter most, catalysing industry-wide progress. We care about people, peace, prosperity, and the planet, and are committed to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We stand up for integrity through our supply chains, in our work, and of our membership. Join us. Together, we are helping transform the world of jewellery for good and underpinning trust in the global jewellery and watch industry so our planet and communities flourish. And people continue to hold jewellery close to their hearts for centuries to come.
Great, well, thank you for that video. I just need to reconfigure something on the webinar briefly before we get into our discussion. Bear with me. Perfect, there we go. Welcome, Iris, great to have you with us.
Thank you, and it's nice to be here. On behalf of the RJC, well, I wish all the participants a good day wherever you are in the world, and we're delighted to be having this dialogue with you.
Very good. So to kick off, a lot of people who will have joined us today won't necessarily have heard of the Responsible Jewellery Council, that they won't necessarily know what it is. I mean, could you describe what the organisation does? What is the Responsible Jewellery Council?
Well, the Responsible Jewellery Council was founded in 2005. So this year we're celebrating our 15th year, and it was founded by some leading companies like Tiffany, Cartier, De Beers, ABN AMRO, Rosie Blue, Signet. And it was really a critical milestone when those 14 founding members came together to say we need to develop a standard for the industry from mining to retail and to really promote a vision of a responsible worldwide supply chain and to install that trust in the supply chain. And it was groundbreaking because we developed a standard that has a broad scope from mining to retail. And if we look back today, 2020, we are over 1,250 member companies. So it's been quite a journey. In practice, how does it work? And I'd like to explain, David, because a company becomes member of the RJC. And it's really about a journey to sustainability, because as we know, the diamond jewelry and watch industry, these are long, complex global supply chains. So it's really a process of continuous improvement. So a company becomes member, will look at its supply chain, will do an internal risk assessment, and will look at different practices on human rights, labor, health and safety, environment, etc. And will look at its management practices. A third-party accredited auditor will step in and will look at how the operations are doing, and then that moves into certification. One important element I'd like to mention also is that this is a long-term process, so it does take time, and we see that many of our members are seeing this as a process, one of continuous improvement and a very big learning curve in understanding better, how their supply chain is managed.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'd just like to say to the audience, please do submit questions, because we're going to have a Q&A at the end, and we'd like to make the session as interactive as possible. So please do use the Q&A function throughout the broadcast and submit your questions. So Iris, as I mentioned earlier, you took office in April last year. What have been your main priorities since you took office as Executive Director?
Well, we are a membership organization. We were founded in 2005, like I shared, by 14 pioneer companies. Today we have 1,250 companies. So the first priority is members first. And it is, how can we serve our members better? How can we give them the tools to integrate sustainability into their operations in very different aspects? So that's the first key pillar. The second key pillar that is important to us is what we call advocacy for positive change. We believe, as a leading standard setting organization, we are the voice for the industry. So we want to participate in multi-stakeholder consultation, and we will also want to be present and share our views, such as in 2 weeks, we will be participating with a responsibility panel at the UN Global Compact Leaders Summit with over 100,000 participants. That's an example of how we want to promote the voice of the industry. And the third pillar is partnerships, partnerships for the goals. I think if there's one thing that we see happening with this crisis is that many more organizations are talking to each other, are looking at synergies, are looking at more collaboration. And we as RJC also see that as the only way forward. We do not want to reinvent the wheel. We want to work together with other organizations in the industry and outside the industry to really contribute to development. And a final thought on that is, of course, that if a company becomes member of the RJC and implements the code of practices, they're contributing to the bigger picture of the world, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So our key partnership with the UN Global Compact on promoting the goals, but also helping the members understand, what they can do to contribute long-term is also part of our bigger vision. So 3 key pillars.
Okay. So obviously we're living through some extraordinary times now due to the coronavirus pandemic. How would you say that COVID-19 is going to change the global gems, jewelry and watches industry?
Well, David, we see that all industries are suffering. And of course, we are the jewelry and watch industry. And I think everybody is concerned about, what is going to be the discretionary spend? Are people going to buy jewelry? What is happening in the supply chains? Because we know that, millions of lives are touched. What I strongly believe in is that responsibility will only matter more. It will be on everyone's agenda. Where it could have been a nice to have, this is now your, how would I call it, the operating license to market. And I thought I would share, a few thoughts. That first of all, if we talk about sustainability now, post-COVID, we need government support, because this is an extreme crisis that we've never seen before. So we need very clear measures from governments around the world, not just for the recovery phase, but also long term. And we know that certain communities are very vulnerable. And I think we'll touch upon that, for example, in ASM. So we need to see also that the workers in on the manufacturing in India, in Africa, in Thailand, wherever in the world, that they are protected, and that we can see that we manage that diligently. Then the second point I wanted to mention is that values matter. So I think the good news is that many of our enterprises are thousands of small businesses, where often the purpose of that organization is for the next generation to step in. So we believe that purpose will become even more relevant. How does your company contribute to the bigger picture of society? And we believe that also, for example, for the RJC, we have a huge opportunity to connect with smaller enterprises and help them on that journey. And then a third element I wanted to share is it is also this crisis is also a big opportunity for us as a reset button for the industry to look at, okay, how can we've done a lot of good work in the supply chain, but how can we do better? How can we look at supply chains and really, and look at the fundamentals, which is, human rights, labor rights? How can we look at when we go in the multi-tier of the supply chains, because they're very long? How can we see that human rights, labor rights, environmental impact, etc., are more embraced than ever? So it's also, I think, an opportunity to reset expectations, and I think that's a great opportunity. And then finally, we work in a industry of beauty and emotions. We have a beautiful product. And what we see is that the consumer cares. And if we look at the consumer, the generation, the millennials or the Gen Z, they are looking more than ever at what is a company doing? How are they doing it? And what difference are they making? So I also believe we have a great opportunity to look at the story behind the product. So it will never be the same. I think we all that new normal. But I'm quite optimistic that we will get through this.
Yeah. Well, I know that a number of studies have shown that millennial consumers are increasingly asking to know more about the supply chain. Where did the gem originally come from? And they want reassurance also that people have not been exploited on the supply chain in the creation of the pieces of jewellery, and also that the environment hasn't been damaged in the creation of the jewellery as well. So turning now to sustainability, could you give me sort of, if you like, your take on what sustainability is in terms of the gems and jewellery industry, and why sustainability is so important?
Well, there have been a lot of discussions about, what sustainability means. And I mean, I had a great discussion last week with Sibjo also, and Ed Johnson asked me, what does it mean? And I always go back to the fact that sustainability is really about human dignity. And that's a universal principle around the world. As a company, you need to look at your impact on society. You need to look at, the people that work for you, the people in your supply chain. You need to look at your processes. And absolutely, you need to find that balance that we've definitely recognized more than ever with the planet. And that's an evolution. And that takes a lot of time to do that well. So I always say in an imperfect world, you need to try to handle that. So that means is you need good management systems, and you need to work very well with your supply chain and understand what that supply chain means. Sometimes people say, well, why, and why is sustainability so important? Well, it's all about trust. It's about your reputation. It's about the equity of your company. And if you look at some other industries that had, for example, big crises, if you look at, if it was, the BP oil spill, or if it was Nike with suppliers and supply chain management. All of them, if you looked at all the steps that they take, it was always going back to the basics and fundamentals of sustainability. So I go back to human dignity.
Okay, good. So how, in this world that has changed so much now, I was watching Tyson Fury, the boxer, on Instagram this morning. He said the wheels had fallen off. Well, it kind of is like that, isn't it? With so many changes now, as we sort of pause, how is the RJC going to get its message out there about sustainability and its importance? What platforms are you going to use to get the message right out across to the global jewelry and watches industry?
Well, first of all, I have I would call it my ambassadors, and those are our team. We have a great team in London. We have experts in the US, in India, in Geneva. So it starts with our own team, but then we have our 1,250 members and all our industry organizations and associations we work with. And I must say, I also believe again in that element of partnerships. We have all the centers around the world. If you think about diamonds, look at Antwerp, or Dubai, Mumbai, Israel. We need to work more and more with centers, with organizations, to give that message, but not just to tell, but absolutely to show. And I think there are a lot of leading examples of some of our members. And I think it's also our opportunity as RJC to share that knowledge. So we will be investing quite some capacity in not just webinars, but also help desk to our members, additional data and information. And like I said, we're very open to work with other organizations on expert topics to serve our members and the industry better.
So you have been very passionate about gender empowerment. Can you highlight what the biggest challenges are across the world now in terms of gender empowerment in its relationship with the jewelry and the watches industry?
Well, yes, I'm very passionate on the agenda of gender equality, and the reality is all industries, we in the world are not doing enough, because if you look at the World Economic Forum's 2020 Global Gender Gap Report, it will take 257 years to close the economic gender gap. So I think that's unacceptable. What I see as challenges for women is that there's still, too much, first of all, what I call gender biased perception or stereotyping. Then if we really go into the supply chain, often it's about unpaid labor or non-recognition of work. And it's critical that the element also of education and giving opportunities to women and girls. And then if we look at ASM in particular now,
so that's artisanal mining, I believe.
Then we know that the most vulnerable communities are with women and children. So going back to the question, I think
could you explain that with regard to artisanal mining? The most vulnerable communities are children and women. Can you explain what you mean there?
Because what we see now is if there's if there's less demand, and if the women don't have work, and at the same time you have this the commodity pricing, you have health and safety measures that could become under pressure. We need to see that there's a safety net. So that's why I've been also supporting very much as RJC the call of action from the NGOs that they announced. I think it was over a week ago, to say to private sector and to governments and to financial institutions, we need to be extra cautious for the supply chain.
The issues surrounding gender empowerment, are they more acute in the developing world, or is it just a global problem that needs to be tackled everywhere in your view?
Well, it's a global problem, but you will, of course, anywhere in the world. If you know, I don't like to make the discrepancy developed or underdeveloped. It's a global problem, but there will be, of course, specific local issues depending where you are in a region in the world, because often we still see that there's, you know, a lack of legislation to be able, for example, women to have the same rights to have access to finance or start a company or education opportunities. So that's from a legal perspective where governments have to take action. I think from the private sector around the world, we have a huge opportunity to empower and to lead by example and to promote the agenda of gender equality. And that's often, like I said at the beginning, a lot of still conscious or non-conscious bias. So training, education, learning, leading by example is important.
So does the RJC reach out to governments, to lobby governments to bring in this kind of legislation? Could you explain a little bit about the relationship between RJC and governments that you alluded to earlier?
Well, the RJC is part, for example, of the MSG, you know, from the OECD. We work, for example, very closely with the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Till date, we have not targeted directly through governments, because often we work through trade associations and through other organizations in our network where we're partnering with. And often those are the organizations who are really locally on the ground and understand what is happening in policy evolution, in regulations. So they will inform us. What is important is that we, of course, listen to what globally is happening on the agenda of governments. And that's why the Code of Practices, the new Code of Practices that was released at the OECD in April 2019 covers evolving regulatory framework, because we want our members to be ready for evolving international best practices, so that they're fit for purpose to be resilient for long-term growth.
So turning to miners around the world during this period of the lockdown, what are your concerns about the plight of miners, particularly those in developing countries, and particularly, say, artisanal miners who do most of the extraction of colour gemstones? What is their plight during lockdown? How has it changed during the lockdown period? And what can the RJC do in terms of reaching out to its members to support mining communities, particularly in developing countries?
Well, we have a shared responsibility in a supply chain, and last week, when 73 global civil society organizations and community-based associations were calling for immediate and concerted action from governments, financial institutions, international organizations, and private actors support to ask help, you know, and promote an agenda of action on artisanal mining communities. We as RJC said we will promote this to members. So we have, you know, but then the question is, after promotion, what is action? So we're looking to discuss this with key stakeholders. We had an MSG call yesterday with the OECD. We are looking, you know, to work very intensively with other industry organizations to see how we can help, because it's a responsibility. I think it's a really critical responsibility, and more than ever.
So I noticed in your video there were references to how the RJC set standards for precious metals and gemstones. Could you sum up what the RJC has done to set these standards in those areas, particularly relating to gold production, for example, but also silver and precious gemstones?
Well, so in 2019, when we launched the new Code of Practices, it now includes also colored gemstones and silver. And this is an important milestone for the RJC, because when you take a piece of jewelry, it will have different components of colored gemstones, silver, gold, all kinds of materials. So we believed it was critical in, again, advancing the agenda on sustainability to see that we broaden the scope of materials. we're working very hard on practical toolkits. We believe it's important that we can help member companies to implement good practices. So we have a color gemstone task force that one of our experts, Dr. Nawalaid Hossein, is working on with some key members organizations. And what is important again is the knowledge that we have, we will share with the industry. And we're also working closely with other associations in Thailand on looking at, what are good practices, and again, to share that knowledge.
Okay, thank you. So I'm about to ask you my last question before we move to the Q&A. Again, I invite people, do please submit any questions on the Q&A channel. I see we've already got quite a few questions to go through, so that's great. Iris, I'd just like to ask you, I know you're also very passionate over concerns surrounding mental health issues. Now, during this crisis, clearly these are coming to the fore. We're now in the period where in some countries, retailers are looking to reopen their shops. There's been a lot of uncertainty about loss of jobs, particularly in the West, potentially across all sectors of the global economy. Well, millions of jobs are being lost. We've seen in the United States alone a huge increase in jobless figures. What are your concerns about the mental health issues arising now during the pandemic? And what, if anything, can the RJC do within the jewellery and watches sector to heighten awareness and find solutions to the problems that will arise?
Well, things are changing fast, and I think for all of us, this has been an extreme period of uncertainty. We don't know what is coming. Okay, we're in the recovery phase, but there's still a lot of unclarity. Maybe a second wave will come. We know from the World Health Organization that depression and anxiety cost to the global economy $1 trillion annually. This was prior to the pandemic. And what now many people are experiencing is, health issues, anxiety, indeed. Will I have a job? Will I not have a job? It could be stress. People are stuck, loneliness, burnout, isolation. I think, first of all, it's really important that we break the taboo and everyone goes through very different stages in their life and can have these moments. And I think it's really important that also now, because of the COVID, we almost take it also as an opportunity to say, well, it is definitely okay to talk about mental well-being, and it's a necessity. It's a necessity. And I think it's also what you will see is that many organizations, luckily and hopefully, will take this agenda on mental well-being very seriously, because as you say, you have to go back to work. Maybe you have to go back into a store, into an office, back into a manufacturing site. And people are very concerned, rightly so, about their security, their families, and their loved ones. So I see that the COVID-19 also has an opportunity to break the stigma, set the tone for transparency, open up to, to your team members and your community. It's okay. It is okay, not to feel well and to be scared. It's fine. And I think there's some really good initiatives. In the UK, you have an initiative which is called Shout. You have I saw also some really great initiatives in Belgium, in France, in Italy. And I think more and more you will see these initiatives to help people understand what they can do and how they can tackle it. So I think it's also about leadership, and now people stepping up and seeing how they can prepare of bringing people back to work in a safe space, in a safe mental space of well-being.
So is it up to employers to set up structures in terms of dealing with any mental health issues arising from their employees? Can the RJC give any kind of guidance to employers within the jewellery and watches sector?
Well, I think it's both. I think that governments have to have facilities and have to have health and safety actions to be able to help people. But I think there's indeed a leadership role that companies can take to see that there is that balance and that there is that openness. And that's about the culture of an organization, small or big, that anyone can do. to see that there's indeed that safety space. So I believe very much in leadership, and small companies, larger companies. I think people will have to step up, because it is also the cost to society. And if we want the youngsters to succeed, that's the future. We need to see that it's okay.
Thanks so much, Iris. We've got some excellent questions I've seen lined up. So let's turn now to the Q&A. We have a question from an anonymous attendee, but I suspect that attendee is in India. Of course, India is the main center for the manufacturing and processing of diamonds around the world. And the diamond manufacturing factories in India are just now starting to open up with social distancing in place. And the question reads as follows. In India, the diamond pipeline in manufacturing is multi-dimensional, with many manufacturers, especially manufacturing small diamonds, spread across the cutting centers. They contribute also hugely to the value chain of diamond manufacturing out of India. So the question is, what are your plans or strategy to incorporate these Indian diamond cutters and manufacturers, especially the smaller companies, into the scheme of the RJC, and considering those on-the-ground challenges like social distancing? I mean, how can you bring them more diamond manufacturers in as members, and how can you reach out to them, and what guidance can you give them in terms of tackling the current challenges of as the lockdown eases?
Well, first of all, namaste. I'm very passionate about India, and I had the privilege and the opportunity to work for over 10 years on site in SEEPs and in manufacturing. So I saw a lot of work on the ground. So we as RJC are of course here to support you, and we have a dedicated point of contact. He's here on the participating, Kinjal Shah. We are happy to set up a program in India. We are already having a lot of members also in the manufacturing, so we could be sharing best practices, what we have from other members to these enterprises. So happy to to set up a site forum on this. We will continue to grow, and I think that's why for us, for example, it's so important to have that local engagement. We have Brandy in the US. She's our champion of engagement with the members, and we have the same with Kinjal. So when someone becomes a member, they're not on that journey alone. They have a full support of a dedicated person, but also a team in London with expertise to help them. And we can definitely share, we have already guidance on health and safety and other measures, particularly now for post-COVID. So we'd be happy to share that. And we are looking very much forward to welcome many more companies in our network.
There's a question from Boitshoko Kebakile, who's asking, does the RJC have any training programs to help small jewelry brands become more sustainable, and how to become so?
Well, I think that's a very good question. Yes, we have training programs, but we did acknowledge that we need to have more targeted, specific programs for smaller enterprises. And this is a roadshow that we're launching after the Leaders Summit of the UN Global Compact mid-June. So it really will be the basics of sustainability, from what are the SDGs, how as an organization can you contribute, what does a responsible supply chain look like, what are some key steps you can take on labor rights, on overhours, on protective equipment, on environmental impact, etc. So that whole roadshow with sessions will start during the summer. And so we'd be happy to share that also through this forum.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee asking, what is the profile of companies who become members of RJC? So what type of jewelry and watch companies are members? Manufacturers, retailers, designers, what type of companies?
Well, I think that's the big strength of the RJC, that we have such a diversified group of companies. So of course we have the big mining houses like Alrosa and De Beers and Rio Tinto, etc. And we have at the retail side, we'll have big players like Tiffany and Signet, but we have a lot of different players in the throughout the supply chain, hundreds of them. Smaller enterprise, 64% are for us smaller enterprises. So very diversified. That was also the purpose why the RJC was founded, because we want to be inclusive and we want to really have the full scope of the supply chain. And that's why the standard is also so important, because it's inclusive from mining to retail.
We have a question from Sanika Harsha, who asks, is there a grading system that the RJC operates to know how a piece of jewelry ranks on the sustainability scale?
That's a very good question. We don't have that. We don't have that.
Vinod Kapoor is asking, can a retailer become a member of RJC?
Yes, of course.
So it's right across the supply chain, isn't it? It's from the mine.
Yeah, it's right across the supply chain. Yeah. And I think that's so important, because when that consumer walks in, for example, at retail level, it is important to not overpromise, but say exactly what you're doing. And the RJC, the Code of Practices, is all about management practices and the full scope, from the element, what we talked about, human rights, labor rights, environment, health and safety. Because what is important when we talk about sustainability, we cannot isolate one component from the other. Because on one hand, you cannot say, well, I'm doing great work in, let's say, community philanthropy, and on the other side, I am having issues in my supply chain on human rights. So you need to tackle the different components, and the Code of Practices is very robust and does that.
One questioner is asking about your views regarding blockchain and whether or not you feel it has capacity to support the quality of supply chains. Because blockchain is a way of auditing electronically every step along the supply chain. What are your views about blockchain? Are you actively encouraging implementation of blockchain along the supply chain?
I encourage any initiative that contributes to development and to sustainability. And technology is, of course, a big enabler. I'm sure that in the next decade, up to 2030, we will see new solutions, new transformations to look at what indeed the supporting evidence is throughout a supply chain. And that's really good for us as RJC, because whatever technology is there, you will always need to have a framework to test it upon. And that's why the Code of Practices can give that framework, and technology can support that.
Just a quick follow-up from me on blockchain. Do you have concerns that it's perhaps difficult to implement blockchain in very remote, impoverished areas around artisanal mines, for example, where it may be hard to bring in electronic audits, where there may be a lack of technical gadgets available, lack of literacy, that kind of thing. Also, with regard to blockchain, it's not another concern that the information within the blockchain is only as good as what's put into it. In other words, if there's any falsehood placed into the blockchain at any stage, that can weaken the entire chain.
Well, if you look at blockchain or any technology solution, or even technology solutions for audit purposes, like to audit the Code of Practices, of course, it will depend wherever you are in the world and what the possibilities are and what the infrastructure is that is available. So I'm sure that will also evolve.
A question from Sweta Tolasaria in India, who asks, is it possible to apply the principles of sustainability on a small scale too?
Absolutely, absolutely, because often if you are a small enterprise, like I said, and many entrepreneurs will, be their owner of their business and have maybe 1 or 2 people with them, you can decide quickly. You can look at at your practices very practically, and any company can do that. I think it becomes interesting when, for example, you have a small enterprise and you're working within a bigger supplier network, and you're supplying to someone, to also engage more and learn from one another. So I also see that as a future, that supplier relations were already important. Supplier, I would call it transformation programs, but that will only accelerate. There's no other option, because it's all about trust. And at the end of the day, it is that consumer that will walk in that store or online and will buy one of our pieces and wants to know, has this been produced in the right circumstances? Has it touched people's lives, and has it contributed to development?
It's a very interesting question from Boitshoku Kebakile in Botswana. Boitshoku says that Iris had mentioned that RJC deals with trade associations. Botswana says he's a member of the newly formed Association for Jewellery Manufacturers in Botswana. How do we as an association go about nurturing a relationship with the RJC with the goal of facilitating sustainability in the Botswana jewellery industry? And he adds, webinars such as this, for example, would be beneficial.
Well, we welcome engagement with you. We have some of the team members are participating from membership engagement, and we'd be happy to reach out and work closely with you. We'd be delighted.
Are you finding, Iris, you're getting more and more inquiries from, if you like, nascent trade groups in say, developing countries? Are you constantly receiving inquiries from new groups around the world?
Yes, so I think that's the good news. When you asked the question about sustainability, is that in 2015, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals were negotiated by 193 countries, so governments. So, and everyone agreed, this is the agenda. This is the agenda on people, on peace, on planet, on prosperity. And it's about leaving no one behind. And what we see now is that this global agenda with a target to 2030, and the fact that the RJC, through its code of practices, can contribute to the bigger agenda of the world, we see a lot more inquiries from different organizations around the world and from different countries. And so we as RJC, as our third strategic pillar, partnership for the goals, we embrace that. It is the only way forward. So we'd be happy to work with associations, networks, and share what we have and learn from them, because we can learn as an organization. We need to be humble. We can learn a lot of the reality on the ground and see how the guidance to the implementation of the code of practices can be strengthened to help players of all sizes to implement sustainability.
Rebecca Steventon is asking, can an independent business consultant become a member of RJC? For example, I work with small brands to improve their sustainability practices and operations, she says.
Well, we have of course, the commercial membership, but we also have other categories like supporters, etc. I have to talk to my membership engagement team and see, what the options are.
Saskia Schutt says, hello from Brussels. As an artisan goldsmith and designer maker, I have been following the activities of RJC for around 5 years, and I regularly have consulted your website to find information about suppliers. Is membership possible for small independent jewelers like myself?
Yes, absolutely. And bonjour.
Yes, we should add that Iris is Belgian, so there she loves the questions coming in from Brussels. So you welcome people right across the sector around the world, don't you, as members?
Yeah.
Actually, Iris, if I may follow up, If I may follow up on that, can you give us any sort of outline at all about, if you like, membership criteria for small operators in the jewellery and watches sector, and any notion about costs of membership as well? Because certainly with regard to operators in the industry in the developing countries, I mean, cost is obviously a primary issue. What light can you throw on that?
Well, we have approximately, when we look at the minimum fee, which is around $700 and I think $50 or $60 for smaller members. And I'm happy to share again after this webinar also all the possibilities so that people can see. So on one hand, there's the membership fee of the organization, and then at the same time, of course, organizations will go and do the audit. So you will have the audit cost, but I don't like to use it as cost. I see it as an investment because what we see is that many organizations, small enterprises, tell us also, well, it really has helped us to improve practices, to do peer learning, and to see to it that we are fit for purpose for the future. So we can share that information through my membership engagement team after this webinar.
So what's the key email address that people should write to, Elise? There's one, is it communications at responsible?
Yeah, the communications one, yeah.
Yeah, so communications at responsiblejewelry.com. We have a question from Sanjay Fofalia, who I think is in India again. I need to know if you have a representative in Jaipur, India, who can help us out on RJC guidelines on compliance and sustainability. Obviously, Jaipur is the great centre for cutting of coloured gemstones. Iris?
Yes, we do. We will. He's not based. Kinjal Shah is not based in Jaipur, but he goes on regular basis to Jaipur, and so we'd be happy to be in touch with you and follow up. And it's the same for, you know, we have Brandy Dello in the US. Anyone who's interested to understand more about the RJC, you know, happy that you reach out to our team.
It's a question from an anonymous attendee who would like to know, does the RJC have any training or certification courses which would help millennials or consumers learn about the standards required along the supply chain?
Well, we have training material on the code of practices and you know, practical steps. But I think it would be a great suggestion to have some more focused material on that. So I will take that up with the team. I think it's an excellent suggestion to be able to explain more about the RJC to that millennial or Gen Z consumer.
One questioner would like to know whether or not finished pieces of jewellery carry any certification that is endorsed by RJC to show that they comply with standards on sustainability.
I think it's always important to go back to what the RJC is and the code of practices. The code of practices is not about product, it's about management systems. So it's really about how, you know, the processes, how you manage the processes from the moment that indeed from, you know, the buying to the manufacturing to the distribution, and looking at different aspects of your supply chain in the areas of human rights, labor rights, product integrity, environment, etc. So I think it's always really important to mention that, you know, this is about management practices, which is critical because it's something that is always ongoing, that you need to review. And aside from the fact that it's proactive risk management, it also enhances operational efficiency and helps on building your brand equity of trust to your consumer.
Chandan Gupta is asking, Can collaboration as a strategy help us to manage this critical situation of the coronavirus pandemic? Do you think that collaboration is the key? I guess this question relates to partnerships. What is RJC doing to enhance partnerships around the trade, the jewelry and watch trade around the world?
So yes, we believe that partnerships is the only way forward. It's our third strategic pillar. We call it partnership for the goals. In other words, we want to partner with organizations around the world to contribute to the bigger agenda 2030. So we are already working with all our organizations and trade associations around the world, but we welcome any organization that can, that is part of the jewelry and watch industry to collaborate with us on specific topics and see, what the added value is from both organizations on sharing expertise and material.
Iris, will you be collaborating increasingly with trade fairs in the sector around the world to spread the message of what RJC is doing? I mean, do you have plans when we can travel again, perhaps to attend some of the key shows coming up later this year, like Vicenza, Hong Kong, for example?
Well, we of course will follow where the trade is. Will it be virtual or physical? Time will tell. We will be cautious when we travel. I think it will be very different. I think we were all looking very much forward to many of the fairs, and especially we had our launch really was meant to be on of the repositioning of the RJC was going to be at JCK. Unfortunately, that did not take place. Yes, Vicenza and other trade fora around the world, we will participate, but it will be or virtual through webinars or sessions, or it will be face to face, with depending what the measures what will be implemented.
So do you think fora like this, using webinars and digital communications, will increasingly come to the fore due to this crisis?
I think this crisis taught us we can work very well remotely. I see an example of my team; they're doing great. And I think
in the Q&A, I can see Brandy is up there.
Yeah, and so I think and it's been very nice, catching up and through Zoom, etc. But I think at the end of the day, we are a relationship business, and I think that that physical contact is really important, and probably also for the mental well-being. I don't think it's good to sit 12 hours in front of your screen and talk. So I think that physical engagement, that contact with the members, being in their own environment, going to visit them at their sites, at their manufacturing sites, seeing what's happening on the ground is also important to see, what are issues, what are opportunities, how we can help with solutions. So I think it's a mixture of both. That will be the new normal.
Good. So Iris, we're just coming to wrap up now as the hour approaches. I'd just like to ask you, last week you held your AGM. It was held virtually. I wonder if you could tell us what the key messages of the RJC AGM were, and a little bit about the new board appointments.
Well, the AGM is always an important moment, because you look back at the past year, what we have achieved, and we were quite happy as a team what we've done, because we've really focused on membership first, retention and growth, and then indeed a key achievement was the partnership with the UN Global Compact, the partnership, for example, in the US with the Plum Club. So we've had very different milestones, but there's a lot of work to be done. And I have a very ambitious board and a very ambitious chairman. And I see also Mark Hanna, chair of the Communications Committee, member of the board here present today. So it's great to work with such leaders, because they challenge, and I like challenges. And then I challenge my team. So
yeah, well, I can see your team have been backing you up, because on the Q&A, Mark and Brandy have been, giving all kinds of information to people who've tuned in today, which is great. Okay, so thanks so much, Iris, for this opportunity today and for explaining the message of RJC, particularly during these really challenging times in which we're now living. It's been really great that you've been able to explain exactly what the RJC is, what it does, what its goals are, and how that relates to the world that is changing so rapidly around us. So I'd like to say thank you very much. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Delighted that you joined us today. Stay safe.